The veterinarian's hands froze mid-examination, her stethoscope slipping from trembling fingers as she stared at the German shepherd chained in the scorching Austin heat. His desperate howls had echoed through the trailer park for 3 days, but this wasn't just any abandoned dog. The faded military tattoo on his ear told a different story entirely. Eleanor Hartwell dropped her coffee mug, ceramic shattering across her porch as recognition dawned in her weathered eyes. "Sweet Jesus," she whispered, watching the blind, tumor-riddled animal struggle to maintain a perfect military stance despite his chains. Sarah Mitchell's heart hammered against her ribs as memories of her brother David's last letter flooded back. Something about a heroic canine who'd saved his entire squad. The same distinctive white blaze across the muzzle. The same intelligent brown eyes now clouded with cataracts and pain. "Call animal control now," she shouted to Eleanor, already reaching for her emergency kit. But as the dog's tags caught the morning sun, one terrible question burned through her mind. How does a Medal of Honor recipient end up dying alone in chains? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Sarah Mitchell had learned to measure her life in sleepless nights and empty bank accounts. At 35, she split her time between the Austin Animal Emergency Center and her cramped trailer in Riverside Park, where broken dreams collected dust alongside veterinary textbooks she could barely afford. Her Honda Civic wheezed through another Texas morning, its odometer pushing 200,000 miles, much like Sarah herself, running on fumes but refusing to quit. The framed photograph on her dashboard showed a younger version of herself standing beside Staff Sergeant David Mitchell before his final deployment to Afghanistan. Her brother's last letter, creased from countless readings, remained tucked behind the picture. "Sis, you'd love the canine units here. These dogs have more honor than most people back home. Promise me something. If anything happens to me, take care of the four-legged soldiers too." That promise had shaped every decision since David's death in 2018. While other veterinarians built lucrative suburban practices treating pampered poodles, Sarah gravitated toward the strays, the abandoned, the broken animals that reminded her too much of returning veterans, damaged but not defeated. Her neighbor, Eleanor Hartwell, represented everything Sarah both admired and feared about growing old in America. At 72, the widow carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who'd survived too many losses to count. Eleanor's husband, Harold, had returned from Vietnam in 1971, but the war never left him. 23 years later, Harold's Purple Heart became Eleanor's only inheritance when PTSD finally claimed its delayed victory. "Back in my day, we didn't throw money at every sob story," Eleanor would often declare from her porch, watching Sarah load another rescued animal into her car. But Sarah had caught her neighbor slipping food scraps to strays when she thought no one was looking. The contradiction fascinated her. Eleanor's sharp tongue masking a heart that understood suffering intimately. Sarah's own contradictions ran deeper. At 35, she felt the biological clock's relentless ticking, heard friends discussing preschool applications and soccer schedules while she debated whether to spend her last $50 on groceries or heartworm medication for a stray. She'd chosen animals over starting a family, telling herself that David's memory demanded this sacrifice. The dream of opening her own clinic, specifically for military and police canine veterans, lived in a manila folder stuffed with business plans and loan rejection letters. Every specialist consultation she couldn't afford, every surgery she performed at cost, pushed that dream further away. Yet she persisted, driven by something deeper than financial logic. Her small apartment walls displayed commendations from grateful pet owners alongside David's military honors, creating a shrine to service, his to country, hers to creatures who couldn't advocate for themselves. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd become exactly what David had been, someone who ran toward danger to save lives, regardless of the personal cost. This morning, driving through the familiar maze of mobile homes and chain-link fences, Sarah had no idea that her commitment to keeping David's promise would intersect with a story that began in the mountains of Afghanistan, where heroes were measured not in medals, but in the lives they were willing to sacrifice for others. The howling started again at exactly 7:42 a.m., just as Sarah turned onto Oleander Street. 3 days of this desperate symphony had worn down the entire neighborhood's nerves, but something about this morning's cry made her pull over. The sound carried a different quality, weaker, more desperate, like a final plea from someone who knew their time was running out. She found the source behind a rusted chain-link fence, where a massive German shepherd lay chained to a metal post driven deep into the hard-packed Texas dirt. The sight made her stomach lurch. The dog's left eye was completely white with cataracts, while the right eye wept constantly from infection. A grotesque tumor, roughly the size of a grapefruit, protruded from his chest, its surface angry red and weeping. His ribs showed clearly through matted fur caked with mud and his own waist. But it was what he did next that stopped Sarah's heart completely. Despite his obvious agony, despite being barely able to see, the German shepherd struggled to his feet when he sensed her presence. His legs shook with the effort, but he managed to pull himself into a perfect military attention stance, chest out, head high, eyes forward. Even chained and dying, some deep training compelled him to show respect to a potential superior officer. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, fumbling for her phone while her hands shook uncontrollably. "Been going on for 3 days now," came a gravelly voice behind her. Eleanor Hartwell shuffled across her small porch, clutching a steaming coffee mug. "Figured you'd stop eventually. You always do." Sarah spun around, tears already streaming down her face. "Eleanor, this is animal abuse. We have to—" "What we have to do and what we can do are two different things, honey." Eleanor's voice carried the weight of someone who'd learned life's hardest lessons through experience. "That's Marcus Hendricks's dog. He's a veteran. Came back from Afghanistan about 4 years ago. Used to be a decent enough fellow before." She gestured vaguely at her temple, as if summoned by their conversation. The sound of a truck door slamming echoed from the adjacent property. Marcus Hendricks emerged from a battered Ford pickup, moving with the careful precision of someone trying to appear sober. He was younger than Sarah had expected, maybe early 40s, with prematurely gray hair and the hollow-eyed look she'd seen on too many veterans. His clothes were wrinkled, suggesting he'd slept in them, and the smell of stale alcohol preceded him by several feet. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" Marcus's voice carried the aggression of someone cornered, but Sarah caught the slight tremor that suggested vulnerability beneath the anger. "Sir, I'm a veterinarian. This animal needs immediate medical attention." Sarah kept her voice steady, professional, despite the fury building in her chest. "He's severely dehydrated, has what appears to be a mammary tumor, and possible infections in both eyes." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Lady, I don't have money for vet bills. Hell, I can barely keep myself fed." "Then surrender him to a rescue organization. There are people who—" "That dog is mine." The words came out flat, final. "Cost me $800 to get him after I got back. He's staying right where he is." Sarah felt her professional composure cracking. "Sir, with respect, this animal is dying. The tumor alone could kill him within days, and the infections—" "I said he's fine where he is." Marcus stepped closer, using his height advantage to intimidate. "Now get off my property before I call the cops." Eleanor's coffee mug hit the porch with a sharp crack. "Marcus Hendricks, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. That dog's got more honor in his left paw than you've shown in 4 years of drinking yourself stupid." "Stay out of this, Eleanor," Marcus snapped. but Sarah noticed how he wouldn't meet the older woman's eyes. The German shepherd whimpered softly, a sound that cut through their argument like a knife. Sarah looked down to see the dog attempting to wag his tail despite everything, still trying to please, still hoping for kindness from the humans around him. "I can pay you," Sarah heard herself saying. $500, cash, today." Marcus paused, clearly tempted. $500 probably represented more money than he'd seen in months. "Let me examine him properly, provide emergency treatment. If he's beyond help, I'll make sure he doesn't suffer anymore." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but she had to try something. The silence stretched between them while the German shepherd continued his labored breathing. Sarah counted her heartbeats, 10, 15, 20, before Marcus finally nodded. "Cash first," he said. "And if you try to steal him or report me or anything like that, I'll make your life hell. You understand me?" Sarah nodded, already calculating how she'd explain this expense to her already overdrawn bank account. "I'll be back in an hour with the money and a proper transport crate." As she walked back to her car, the German shepherd's eyes followed her movement. For just a moment, she could swear she saw something like hope flicker in that one good eye. The Austin Animal Emergency Center's X-ray machine hummed to life at 10:47 a.m., casting ethereal shadows of bone and tissue onto the digital screen. Sarah had already withdrawn her last $500 from the ATM, money she'd been saving for her car registration, but the German shepherd's condition left no room for financial considerations. Dr. James Crawford, the clinic's senior surgeon, whistled low as the images populated his monitor. "Sarah, you need to see this," James called, his voice carrying an unusual tension. "This isn't just any dog." She hurried over, still covered in mud from carefully extracting the German shepherd from his chains. The animal, she'd started thinking of him as Hero, despite not knowing his real name, lay sedated on the examination table, finally peaceful after days of agony. "Look at this." James pointed to a small rectangular shadow near the dog's shoulder blade. "That's a military-grade identification chip. The expensive kind they use for special operations K9s." Sarah's breath caught. "Can you read it?" James nodded, pulling up the scanning software. The chip's data appeared on screen like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. K9 Zeus, service number K92847AFG, handler SGT, M. Hendricks, unit 75th Ranger Regiment, status active duty, deployment Afghanistan 2017-2019. "My God," Sarah whispered. "He's not just military, he's special forces." But James wasn't finished. His fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing the Department of Defense's K9 database. What appeared next made both veterinarians step back in shock. "Medal of Honor recipient, K9 Zeus, citation, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty." On 15 March 2019, during operations against enemy forces in Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, K9 Zeus detected an improvised explosive device threatening a 12-man patrol. Despite incoming enemy fire, Zeus positioned himself between the explosive device and friendly forces, sustaining severe injuries when the device detonated. His actions directly saved the lives of 12 American soldiers, including his handler. The room fell silent except for the steady beep of Zeus's heart monitor. Sarah felt her legs go weak. This wasn't just animal abuse. This was the mistreatment of a genuine American hero, a dog who'd literally sacrificed his body to save human lives. "There's more," James said quietly, scrolling through additional records. "Look at his medical history." The files painted a devastating picture. Zeus had suffered traumatic brain injury, partial hearing loss, and severe PTSD from the explosion that earned him his medal. The military veterinary reports detailed months of specialized treatment, behavioral therapy, and gradual rehabilitation. The final entry, dated 6 months after the incident, read, K9 Zeus, medically retired due to service-connected disabilities. Permanent transfer to handler Sergeant Marcus Hendricks approved for continued care and companionship. So Marcus was his handler, Sarah murmured, pieces of the puzzle beginning to form a heartbreaking picture. Zeus saved his life, and Marcus was supposed to take care of him afterward. James pulled up Zeus's current X-rays alongside the military medical files. Sarah, look at this tumor. It's been growing for at least 18 months, probably longer. And these eye injuries, they're not from the explosion. These are recent, consistent with blunt force trauma. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Marcus hadn't just neglected Zeus, he'd actively hurt him. The man whose life Zeus had saved had repaid that sacrifice with abandonment and abuse. Her phone buzzed with a text message, then another. Within minutes, her phone was lighting up with notifications. James's expression grew grave as he checked his own device. Sarah, we have a problem. The story's already out there. Someone at the clinic, maybe a technician, maybe an administrator, had leaked Zeus's identity to social media. The hashtag #SaveK9Zeus was already trending on Twitter, with thousands of shares spreading across Facebook and Instagram. Local news outlets had picked up the story, and Sarah could see news vans beginning to gather in the clinic's parking lot. The narrative spreading online was explosive. Medal of Honor military dog found chained and dying. Owner is the soldier he saved. The photos someone had taken showed Zeus in his current condition alongside his official Medal of Honor ceremony picture, a stark contrast that made Sarah's stomach turn. Public reaction was swift and furious. Comments ranged from demands for Marcus's arrest to offers of financial support for Zeus's treatment. Within 2 hours, a GoFundMe campaign had raised over $15,000, but the attention also brought criticism and controversy. Some commenters argued that spending thousands on veterinary care for one dog was wasteful when homeless veterans struggled for basic needs. The clinic's phone rang constantly. Sarah fielded calls from reporters, animal rights activists, and concerned citizens. The most difficult call came from a representative of the American Legion who wanted to organize an official ceremony once Zeus recovered. "Ma'am, this dog is a national hero," the caller explained. "The American people need to see that we don't abandon our veterans, two-legged or four-legged." But Sarah's immediate concern was medical, not political. Zeus's blood work revealed severe anemia from internal bleeding, likely caused by the tumor. His kidney function was compromised from dehydration and infection. Most critically, they had perhaps 24 hours before his condition became irreversible. "James, can we save him?" Sarah asked, studying the surgical estimates that totaled nearly $8,000. "Maybe, but it'll require tumor removal, eye surgery, and weeks of intensive care. Even then, his quality of life—" James trailed off, unwilling to offer false hope. Outside, the crowd of supporters and media continued to grow. Sarah realized that Zeus was no longer just a patient. He'd become a symbol of everything right and wrong with how America treated its heroes. The question now was whether they could save him before it was too late. The surgery began at 6 a.m. the next morning, with Dr. James Crawford leading a team of 3 veterinary specialists who had volunteered their services after seeing Zeus's story on the news. Sarah stood in the observation gallery, her hands pressed against the glass as she watched the delicate procedure unfold below. The tumor removal alone would take 4 hours, followed by reconstructive work on Zeus's damaged eye. Outside the clinic, a crowd of nearly 200 people had gathered by dawn. Veterans in worn fatigues stood alongside suburban families holding handmade signs reading, "Heroes don't die alone," and "Save our K9 soldier." Eleanor Hartwell had arrived at 5:30 a.m. carrying a thermos of coffee and a folding chair, positioning herself near the clinic's entrance like a guardian angel. That dog's got more people praying for him than some politicians, Eleanor observed to a reporter, her weathered hands wrapped around her coffee cup. Maybe that's because he never asked for anything in return for his service. Inside the surgical suite, Zeus's vital signs remained stable as Dr. Crawford carefully excised the massive tumor from his chest. The growth had spread deeper than the X-rays revealed, wrapping around muscle tissue and threatening to infiltrate his ribcage. Each cut required precision to avoid damaging vital structures, while the anesthesia team monitored his weakened heart. Sarah found herself thinking about David's letters from Afghanistan, particularly one passage she'd memorized. The bond between a soldier and his K9 partner goes beyond anything civilians can understand. These dogs don't fight for country or ideology. They fight for love. Pure, unconditional love for their handler. It's the most honest relationship in war. The irony cut deep. Zeus had demonstrated that pure love by sacrificing his body to save Marcus and 11 other soldiers. In return, Marcus had chained him in the dirt and left him to die slowly. The betrayal seemed almost incomprehensible until Sarah considered what she'd learned about combat trauma and survivor's guilt. Around 10 o'clock a.m., Marcus Hendricks appeared at the clinic's edge of the crowd, staying well back from the main group. He wore the same wrinkled clothes from the day before, but he was sober, painfully, shakily sober. Several veterans in the crowd recognized him immediately, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. "That's him," someone whispered. "That's the handler who abandoned Zeus." Marcus's presence created a ripple of tension through the gathering. Sarah watched from the window as Eleanor Hartwell slowly stood from her chair and approached him. The elderly woman was barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself with the authority of someone who'd survived decades of hardship. "Marcus Hendricks," Eleanor said, her voice carrying across the quiet crowd. "You've got some explaining to do, young man." Marcus kept his eyes fixed on the ground. "I know what you all think of me. I know what I did was wrong." "Wrong?" A gray-haired veteran stepped forward, his American Legion cap askew with anger. "Son, that dog took shrapnel for you. He saved your life and the lives of 11 other Americans, and you chained him up like a piece of equipment." "You think I don't know that?" Marcus's voice cracked. "You think I don't see his face every time I close my eyes? You think I don't remember him jumping in front of that IED? The crowd fell silent, sensing something raw and painful about to surface. "I wake up screaming his name," Marcus continued, tears streaming down his face. "Every night for 4 years, I relive that explosion. I see Rodriguez and Kowalski getting torn apart. I see Zeus flying through the air, blood everywhere, and I can't do anything to stop it." Eleanor's expression softened slightly, recognizing the symptoms she'd lived with for 23 years after Harold returned from Vietnam. "The VA said Zeus would help with my PTSD," Marcus went on. "They said having him around would be therapeutic. But every time I looked at him, all I could see was Afghanistan burning. Every time he barked, I heard incoming mortars. Every time he looked at me with those trusting eyes, I remembered how I couldn't save the others." Dr. Crawford emerged from the surgical suite, pulling off his gloves as he approached Sarah. "The tumor's out, but there were complications. We had to remove more tissue than anticipated, and he's lost a significant amount of blood. The next 6 hours are critical." Sarah nodded, her attention divided between the medical update and the drama unfolding outside. Through the window she could see Marcus surrounded by the crowd, no longer hiding from their judgment. "I started drinking to make the memories stop," Marcus was saying, "and when Zeus would try to comfort me, the way he was trained to do, I'd get angry, not at him, but at myself for being too weak to handle what happened. I'd push him away, lock him outside, anything to avoid those eyes that reminded me I was alive when better men died." An older woman in the crowd wearing a Gold Star mother pin stepped forward. "Son, pushing away the ones who love us most is what trauma does. It makes us hurt the very people trying to help us heal." "I know that now," Marcus whispered. "But knowing it and being able to stop it are different things. The night I chained him up, I'd had another flashback. Zeus tried to wake me up like he always did, and I hit him. I hit the dog who saved my life." The admission sent shockwaves through the crowd. Some people shook their heads in disgust, while others, particularly the veterans, nodded with painful recognition. "I was so ashamed," Marcus continued. "I chained him outside because I was afraid of what I might do next. I thought I was protecting him from me. Instead, I was killing him slowly." Eleanor walked closer, her voice gentle but firm. "Son, my Harold came back from Vietnam in 1971. Took him 23 years to finally lose his battle with the war. I watched him push away everyone who loved him, including me. You want to know the difference between you and Harold?" Marcus looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time. "Harold never got the chance to make it right. You still do." Inside the recovery room, Zeus began showing signs of consciousness around 2:00 p.m. His vital signs had stabilized, and Dr. Crawford cautiously optimistic about his chances. The eye surgery had been successful, though Zeus would never regain full vision. More importantly, the tumor had been completely removed with clean margins. Sarah sat beside Zeus's recovery cage, watching his breathing gradually strengthen. The anesthesia was wearing off, and occasionally his legs would twitch as if he were running in his dreams. She wondered if he was back in Afghanistan, still trying to save his fellow soldiers. The crowd outside had grown to nearly 400 people as word spread across social media. Local news stations provided live updates, and the story had been picked up by national outlets. Donations continued pouring into the GoFundMe campaign, now approaching $30,000. But the most significant development was happening in the clinic's waiting room, where Marcus had finally come inside. He sat alone in a corner chair, staring at his hands, while the weight of public scrutiny and personal guilt crushed down on him. Sarah found him there around 3:00 p.m. after Zeus had been moved to a more comfortable recovery area. "He's going to live," she said simply. Marcus looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Does he remember me?" "Dogs don't hold grudges the way humans do," Sarah replied, sitting across from him. "But they do remember love and pain. I don't expect forgiveness from him or anyone else." Sarah studied Marcus's face, seeing past the alcohol-induced damage to the broken soldier underneath. "My brother David wrote to me about K-9 teams in Afghanistan. He said the bond between handler and dog was sacred, that it represented the best of what humans could be." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Your brother was right. Zeus was the best of me. The only good thing I did in that God-forsaken war was train with him, work with him, trust him, and I repaid that by becoming his worst nightmare. So change that," Sarah said. "Start making different choices. Get help for your PTSD. Show Zeus that the man he saved was worth saving." Through the waiting room window they could see Eleanor still holding court in the parking lot, telling stories to reporters about Harold's struggle with combat trauma and the need for better veteran support services. "That old woman's got more fight in her than half my unit did," Marcus observed. "She's been fighting this war longer than either of us," Sarah replied. "The war that comes after the war. The one that claims veterans years after they come home." As the afternoon sun slanted through the clinic windows, Zeus opened his eyes for the first time since surgery. His vision was cloudy, his movements weak, but he was undeniably alive and fighting to survive. The battle for his physical recovery was just beginning, but the battle for his spirit and Marcus's redemption would prove far more complicated. The confrontation erupted at exactly 4:17 p.m. When Marcus finally worked up the courage to approach Zeus's recovery kennel. Sarah had been monitoring the German shepherd's post-surgical progress when she heard the sharp intake of breath behind her. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, his entire body trembling as Zeus slowly lifted his head at the sound of a familiar voice. "Hey, boy," Marcus whispered, his words barely audible over the clinic's ambient noise. Zeus's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. Despite his weakened condition, despite the pain medication coursing through his system, the dog struggled to stand. His legs shook with the effort, but muscle memory and years of military training compelled him to attempt his signature attention stance. The surgical bandages around his chest strained as he tried to present himself properly to his former handler. But something else happened that made Sarah's throat tighten with emotion. Zeus's tail began to wag, a weak, uncertain movement that spoke to the unbreakable bond between soldier and canine. Even after months of abuse and abandonment, even through the haze of medication and pain, Zeus recognized the man who had once been his entire world. Marcus collapsed into a nearby chair, sobbing with a grief that had been building for 4 years. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "Zeus, I'm so sorry. You saved my life, and I couldn't save yours." The sound of Marcus's breakdown drew other people into the recovery room. Dr. Crawford appeared first, followed by Eleanor Hartwell, who had somehow talked her way past the clinic's security. Behind them came a small group of veterans from the crowd outside, including the Gold Star mother who had spoken to Marcus earlier. "Son," Eleanor said gently, settling her arthritis-stiffened body into a chair beside Marcus, "guilt's a poison that kills from the inside out. I watched it eat my Harold alive for 23 years. Marcus looked up at her through his tears. "How do you live with it, knowing that good people died while you got to come home?" "You don't just live with it," Eleanor replied, her voice carrying the wisdom of hard-won experience. "You honor it. You make the life you were given count for something." One of the veterans, a woman in her 50s wearing an Iraq War veteran cap, stepped forward. "Marcus, isn't it?" When he nodded, she continued, "I'm Patricia Williams. I lost my canine partner Rex to an IED in Fallujah in 2005. Took me 8 years and 3 suicide attempts before I figured out that destroying myself wasn't going to bring him back or honor his sacrifice." Zeus's eyes tracked between the humans surrounding him, his head moving with the careful precision of a dog trying to understand a complex situation. Despite his condition, his intelligence remained sharp, and Sarah could see him processing the emotional weight of the conversation. "The thing about survivor's guilt," Patricia continued, "is that it makes you think you're honoring the dead by destroying yourself. But that's not honor, that's waste. Zeus didn't save your life so you could throw it away." Dr. Crawford had been quietly checking Zeus's vital signs during the conversation, but now he straightened with a concerned expression. "Sarah, his heart rate is elevated, and his breathing's becoming labored. The stress of this interaction might be too much for his current condition." The medical warning created an immediate dilemma. Zeus clearly wanted to reconnect with Marcus, but his body couldn't handle the emotional intensity of the reunion. Sarah found herself caught between her veterinary instincts and her understanding of the psychological healing both Marcus and Zeus desperately needed. 5 more minutes, she decided. But everyone stays calm, and if his condition deteriorates, we end this immediately. Marcus seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. He slowly approached Zeus's kennel, moving with the careful deliberation he'd once used in combat zones. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, boy. I know I failed you when you needed me most. Zeus's response was to press his nose against the kennel door, straining to make physical contact with his former handler. The gesture was so trusting, so full of unconditional love despite everything he'd endured, that it broke something open in Marcus's chest. "I've been going to AA meetings," Marcus said, his voice steadying as he focused on Zeus rather than the crowd of people watching. 3 weeks sober now, and I'm starting therapy at the VA next week. Real therapy. Not just the group sessions where everyone sits around complaining. Eleanor nodded approvingly. "That's a start, son. But healing isn't a straight line. There'll be setbacks and bad days. The question is whether you'll use those bad days as excuses to quit or reasons to fight harder." Outside, the crowd had swelled to over 500 people as the story continued spreading across social media. News helicopters circled overhead and satellite trucks lined the street. What had started as one woman's attempt to save an abused animal had become a national conversation about veterans' care, animal welfare, and the bonds that transcend species. But inside the recovery room, the focus remained intensely personal. Zeus had managed to extend one paw through the kennel door, and Marcus gently held it in his hands, a connection that bridged 4 years of pain and abandonment. "I used to have nightmares about the explosion," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger. "But lately, I've been having a different dream. I dream about the day we graduated K-9 training together. You were so proud when you got your first successful detection. Your tail wouldn't stop wagging for an hour." Sarah watched Zeus's face as Marcus spoke, noting how the dog's ears perked up at certain words and phrases. Despite his injuries and the medications, Zeus was clearly processing familiar sounds and scents, reconnecting with memories that trauma and abuse had temporarily buried. Dr. Crawford checked his watch. "Marcus, I need to ask you to step back now. Zeus's heart rate is approaching dangerous levels, and we can't risk complications." Marcus nodded, understanding the medical necessity, even as it tore at his heart. "I'll be back tomorrow, boy. And every day after that, if they'll let me. I won't abandon you again." As Marcus stepped away from the kennel, Zeus let out a soft whine, not the desperate howling he'd produced while chained, but something closer to a question. Sarah interpreted it as the dog asking why his person was leaving again. "He's not leaving you," Sarah whispered to Zeus, adjusting his IV line. "He's going to get better, just like you are. Sometimes healing means stepping away so you can come back stronger." Eleanor struggled to her feet, her joints protesting the movement. "Marcus, you come see me tomorrow morning. I've got photo albums full of Harold's recovery process. Might help you understand what you're facing." As the group dispersed and the recovery room returned to quiet, Sarah remained with Zeus, monitoring his gradual return to stable vital signs. The confrontation had been emotionally intense for everyone involved, but it had also marked a crucial turning point. For the first time since his rescue, Zeus seemed to have hope. And for the first time in 4 years, Marcus seemed to have a reason to fight for his own survival. The road ahead would be long and difficult for both of them, but they were no longer walking it alone. The crisis began at 2:47 a.m. on Zeus's 4th day of recovery when the emergency monitors screamed their shrill warning throughout the clinic. Sarah, who had been sleeping in a cot beside Zeus's kennel, bolted upright as his vital signs plummeted across the digital displays. His heart rate spiked to dangerous levels, while his blood pressure dropped precipitously, indicating massive internal bleeding. "Dr. Crawford!" Sarah shouted into her phone, her hands already checking Zeus's gums, which had turned an alarming shade of pale gray. "We need you here now. Zeus is crashing." The German shepherd lay motionless except for rapid, shallow breathing that spoke of a body fighting for survival. Blood had begun pooling in his surgical drain, far more than the expected post-operative seepage. Sarah's worst fears were materializing. Despite their careful surgery, something had gone catastrophically wrong. "Doctor." Crawford arrived within 15 minutes, his hair disheveled and surgical scrubs hastily thrown over pajamas. One look at Zeus's condition sent him into emergency mode. Get him to surgery immediately. This looks like a delayed hemorrhage from the tumor site. We missed something. As they rushed Zeus into the operating theater, Sarah's mind raced with terrible calculations. The initial surgery had already cost $8,000 from the GoFundMe donations. Emergency surgery would require another $5,000 to $7,000, money they didn't have. Worse, Zeus's weakened condition meant his chances of surviving a second major operation were marginal at best. "Sarah," Dr. Crawford said as he scrubbed in, "I need you to call Marcus. If Zeus doesn't survive this, he should have a chance to say goodbye." The call to Marcus went straight to voicemail, but Sarah's message was enough to send him racing to the clinic in his battered pickup truck. He arrived as the surgery entered its second hour, still wearing the clothes he'd fallen asleep in, reeking of anxiety, sweat, and desperation. "How bad is it?" Marcus asked, his 4 weeks of sobriety making every emotion feel raw and unfiltered. "Bad," Sarah admitted. "We think there was a delayed rupture in one of the major blood vessels near the tumor site. James is trying to find and repair it now, but Zeus has already lost a lot of blood." Marcus slumped into a waiting room chair, his head in his hands. "This is my fault. If I'd brought him in months ago when the tumor was smaller—" "We don't know that would have made a difference," Sarah said, though privately she wondered the same thing. Outside, word of Zeus's crisis had leaked to the media, and the crowd of supporters had regathered despite the early hour. Eleanor Hartwell arrived at 4:30 a.m. carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing the same clothes from the day before, as if she'd never gone home. "That dog's too stubborn to die," Eleanor declared to anyone who would listen. "Survived Afghanistan, survived that explosion, survived months of neglect. He's not giving up now." But Eleanor's confidence wasn't shared by the medical team. Dr. Crawford emerged from surgery at 6:15 a.m. with grim news. "We found the bleeder and stopped it, but Zeus went into cardiac arrest twice during the procedure. We got him back, but his heart is severely weakened. The next 24 hours will determine everything." The financial reality hit Sarah like a physical blow. The second surgery had cost another $6,000, completely depleting the GoFundMe account and requiring her to sign personal guarantees for the remaining expenses. She was now personally liable for nearly $4,000 she didn't have, with no guarantee that Zeus would survive. Marcus, overhearing the financial discussion, made a decision that surprised everyone. "I'll cover the rest," he said quietly. "I've got savings from my disability payments. Been meaning to do something worthwhile with the money anyway." "Marcus, that's generous, but—" "No," he interrupted. "Zeus earned that money when he saved my life and 11 others. It's his money, not mine. I should have spent it on his care months ago." As Zeus lay unconscious in the recovery room, attached to machines that monitored every heartbeat and breath, the broader implications of his crisis became clear. The national media attention had transformed his story into a symbol of America's treatment of military veterans, both human and canine. Politicians began weighing in, with some calling for better veteran support services, while others criticized the amount of money being spent on one animal. The controversy deepened when a homeless veteran named Robert Chen was interviewed outside the clinic. "Don't get me wrong," Robert said, his words carrying the weight of personal experience. "That dog deserves every bit of care he can get. But I've been waiting 8 months for the VA to approve my disability claim, sleeping in my car because I can't afford rent. Sometimes it feels like this country cares more about 4-legged veterans than the 2-legged ones." His comment went viral within hours, creating a backlash that complicated the public narrative around Zeus's care. Some supporters began questioning whether the resources devoted to one animal could be better used helping human veterans. Others argued that Zeus's story highlighted the broader failures in veteran care, rather than detracting from them. Sarah found herself caught in the middle of a national debate she'd never intended to start. All she'd wanted was to save one suffering animal, but Zeus had become something larger, a symbol of sacrifice, abandonment, and the complicated relationship between a grateful nation and those who serve it. As dawn broke over Austin, Zeus's condition remained critical but stable. His survival hung in the balance, along with the hopes and dreams of hundreds of people who had invested their emotions and money in his recovery. The question now wasn't just whether Zeus would live or die, but what his fate would say about the country he'd served with such unwavering loyalty. Eleanor Hartwell's collapse came without warning at 7:23 a.m. just as the morning shift arrived at the clinic. The 72-year-old woman had been maintaining her vigil in the parking lot for 6 straight days, surviving on coffee and determination when her legs simply gave out beneath her. Sarah, who had been checking on the crowd of supporters, rushed to Eleanor's side as paramedics were called. "Don't you fuss over me," Eleanor wheezed from the stretcher, her weathered hand gripping Sarah's wrist with surprising strength. "That dog needs you more than I do." But at Austin General Hospital, the emergency room physician delivered devastating news. Eleanor had suffered a massive heart attack, complicated by severe dehydration and exhaustion. Her prognosis was grim. Hours, perhaps a day at most. "Is there family we should call?" the doctor asked Sarah, who had accompanied Eleanor in the ambulance. "No family left," Eleanor replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, honey, there's something important in my house. Kitchen drawer next to the stove, legal papers. You need to get them." Sarah wanted to stay with Eleanor, but the older woman insisted she return to Zeus. "That dog's fighting for his life. I've had mine. 72 good years, more than many folks get. Go help him fight." Back at the clinic, Zeus had taken a turn for the worse. His post-surgical complications included a dangerous infection that wasn't responding to antibiotics. Dr. Crawford worked frantically to adjust his treatment protocol, but the German Shepherd's weakened immune system struggled to mount an adequate response. Marcus hadn't left Zeus's side since the emergency surgery, sleeping in a waiting room chair and talking to the unconscious dog throughout the night. Sarah found him reading aloud from what appeared to be military records. "Those are Zeus's commendation letters," Marcus explained, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "I printed them from the database. Figured if he could hear me, he might want to remember better times." The papers detailed Zeus's extraordinary service record. Beyond the Medal of Honor incident, he had conducted 47 successful explosive detection missions, located 23 improvised explosive devices, and participated in 89 combat patrols. His service had directly saved hundreds of lives over his 2-year deployment. "Listen to this one," Marcus continued reading. "From Colonel Martinez, K9 Zeus demonstrates unwavering courage and dedication that serves as an inspiration to all members of this unit. His bond with his handler represents the finest tradition of military service, and his contribution to mission success cannot be overstated." Sarah noticed Zeus's ears twitch slightly at the sound of Marcus's voice, though his eyes remained closed. The connection between handler and dog was somehow persisting through medication and trauma, offering a thin thread of hope. Around noon, Sarah received the call she'd been dreading. Eleanor had passed away peacefully at 11:47 a.m., her final words reportedly being, "Tell that dog I said to keep fighting." The news hit the crowd of supporters like a physical blow. Eleanor had become the unofficial matriarch of the #Save K9 Zeus movement, her straight-talking wisdom and fierce loyalty winning over even the harshest critics. Many of the veterans in the crowd wept openly, recognizing in Eleanor the kind of military spouse who had anchored their own families through deployments and hardships. Following Eleanor's instructions, Sarah drove to the modest trailer where the older woman had lived for 30 years. The kitchen drawer contained a manila envelope marked "Important, Sarah Mitchell," in Eleanor's careful handwriting. Inside, Sarah found documents that made her gasp in disbelief. Eleanor hadn't been the poor widow she'd pretended to be. Harold's life insurance policy, combined with decades of careful investments and property appreciation, had left Eleanor with an estate worth $340,000. But the real shock was the will, dated just 1 week earlier. To Sarah Mitchell, the will read, who showed me that love comes in many forms, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is care when others walk away. I leave my entire estate with one condition, that it be used to establish the Harold and Eleanor Hartwell K-9 Veterans Sanctuary, dedicated to providing medical care and rehabilitation for military and police dogs in need. Sarah sat in Eleanor's tiny kitchen, surrounded by the accumulated memories of a lifetime, photos of Harold in his Army uniform, Purple Heart displayed on the mantelpiece, decades of correspondence with veteran organizations, and wept for the woman who had quietly carried so much pain while helping others heal. Back at the clinic, the crowd had grown to over 1,000 people as news of Eleanor's death spread. Someone had organized a candlelight vigil with veterans, families, and animal lovers gathering to honor both Eleanor's memory and Zeus's fight for survival. But the most significant development came when Marcus emerged from the recovery room with unprecedented news. "Zeus opened his eyes," he announced to Dr. Crawford and Sarah. "Not just reflexive movement, he actually looked at me, recognized me." Rushing to Zeus's bedside, Sarah found the German shepherd weak but undeniably conscious. His tail managed a feeble wag when he saw her, and his nose twitched at familiar scents. Most remarkably, when Marcus spoke the command, "Easy, boy," Zeus visibly relaxed, his breathing becoming less labored. Dr. Crawford conducted a thorough examination, his expression growing increasingly optimistic. "The infection appears to be responding to the new antibiotic combination. His heart rate is stabilizing and his neurological responses are much stronger. I think he's turned the corner." The news electrified the crowd outside. Cheers erupted when Sarah appeared to announce Zeus's improvement, but she also shared the bittersweet news of Eleanor's passing and her extraordinary final gift. "Eleanor Hartwell gave us more than money," Sarah told the gathering. "She gave us a mission. The Harold and Eleanor Hartwell K-9 Veterans Sanctuary will ensure that no military or police dog ever faces the neglect and abuse that Zeus endured. Eleanor's legacy will be measured in lives saved, not dollars spent." The announcement triggered a new wave of donations and volunteer commitments. Within hours, veterinarians, construction workers, lawyers, and animal care specialists had offered their services to help establish the sanctuary. Eleanor's death had transformed from tragedy into catalyst, her final act creating something larger than anyone had imagined. As evening approached, Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Standing before the media cameras, he publicly apologized not just to Zeus, but to every veteran struggling with PTSD and survivor's guilt. "I failed Zeus when he needed me most," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the emotion. "But his forgiveness and Eleanor's example taught me that healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about honoring it by building something better for the future." He announced his intention to complete a comprehensive PTSD treatment program and become a counselor specializing in veteran canine partnerships. "Zeus saved my life in Afghanistan, but he's saving it again now by showing me that second chances are possible." Inside the recovery room, Zeus had managed to lift his head and was attempting to eat solid food for the first time since the emergency surgery. His appetite was limited, but the fact that he showed interest in food indicated his body was beginning the long process of true recovery. Sarah spent the night beside Zeus's kennel, reading aloud from Eleanor's letters to Harold during his Vietnam deployment. The correspondence revealed a woman of remarkable strength and patience, supporting her husband through decades of trauma while never losing faith in his essential goodness. "Love isn't about perfection," one letter read. "It's about persistence, about showing up every day, especially on the days when showing up is the hardest thing you can do." As Zeus's breathing steadied and his sleep became more peaceful, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them all together. A dying dog's cry for help had become a national conversation about sacrifice, redemption, and the bonds that transcend species. Eleanor's final gift had provided the resources, but her true legacy lay in the example she'd set, that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they refused to walk away from suffering. Zeus would survive, Marcus would heal, and the sanctuary Eleanor envisioned would become reality, ensuring that other military animals would never face the abandonment and abuse that had nearly cost Zeus his life. Sometimes, Sarah realized, the most powerful revolutions began with one person deciding to care when everyone else had given up hope. 3 months later, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Zeus stood in the morning sunlight of the Harold and Eleanor Hartwell K-9 Veterans Sanctuary, his scarred but healing body radiating a dignity that had seemed impossible during those desperate days chained in Marcus's backyard. The sanctuary occupied Eleanor's former property, which had been expanded to include adjacent lots donated by inspired neighbors, creating a 15-acre haven for military and police K-9 veterans. Sarah watched from the sanctuary's newly constructed veterinary clinic as Zeus worked with Dr. Patricia Williams, the Iraq War veteran who had become the facility's head behavioral therapist. Zeus wore a specially designed service vest that identified him as a therapy dog, his new purpose emerging from the ashes of his trauma. Despite his partial blindness and the physical limitations left by his ordeal, Zeus had rediscovered his calling, comforting other wounded warriors, both human and canine. "Yeah, easy, boy," Zeus seemed to communicate to a trembling German shepherd named Bruno, a recently retired police K-9 suffering from severe anxiety after a shooting incident. Zeus positioned himself beside the younger dog with instinctive precision, his presence offering the kind of wordless understanding that only comes from shared experience. Marcus emerged from the sanctuary's administrative office, carrying a manila folder filled with applications from K-9 units across the country. His transformation paralleled Zeus's in many ways, both men bearing visible and invisible scars, both finding redemption through service to others. Marcus had completed an intensive 6-month PTSD treatment program and was now 2 weeks away from receiving his certification as a peer support counselor specializing in veteran K-9 partnerships. "We've got 17 new applications this week," Marcus reported to Sarah, his voice carrying a confidence that had been absent for years. 3 from Afghanistan veterans, 4 from police departments, and 10 from military units looking to place retiring K-9s. The sanctuary had become a national model in just 3 months, attracting attention from veterinarians, military officials, and policymakers. The waiting list for services stretched 6 months out, testament to the desperate need that Eleanor's vision had identified. More importantly, not a single animal admitted to the sanctuary had been euthanized due to behavioral or medical issues deemed unfixable by other facilities. Sarah's own transformation was equally remarkable. The shy veterinarian who had once struggled to pay her car registration now directed a $1 million operation staffed by 12 full-time employees and over 100 volunteers. Eleanor's initial bequest had been amplified by ongoing donations, federal grants, and corporate sponsorships, creating a sustainable model for K-9 veteran care. "Dr. Mitchell," called Jamie Chen, a young veterinary technician and daughter of the homeless veteran who had questioned Zeus's expensive treatment months earlier. "Senator Williams is online too. She wants to discuss the federal K-9 veteran care bill." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Robert Chen's viral criticism of spending money on Zeus while human veterans suffered had ultimately led to expanded funding for both causes. The senator's proposed legislation would create a national network of canine veteran facilities while simultaneously increasing support for homeless and disabled human veterans. Zeus's story had become a bridge, not a barrier, to comprehensive veteran care reform. In the sanctuary's memorial garden, a bronze statue of Eleanor Hartwell stood beside a larger monument dedicated to fallen canine heroes. Eleanor's statue depicted her in her favorite pose, sitting in a folding chair with a thermos of coffee, watching over those in her care. Fresh flowers appeared daily, left by visitors who had been touched by her story. Marcus often found himself drawn to Eleanor's statue, particularly on difficult days when his PTSD symptoms resurged. Today marked 4 months since his last drink, but the temptation never fully disappeared. He'd learned to channel those dark moments into his work with other struggling veterans, transforming his pain into purpose. "She'd be proud of what you've built here," said Dr. James Crawford, approaching from the main clinic building. James had left his lucrative private practice to become the sanctuary's chief veterinarian, his decision influenced by witnessing the healing power of the Eleanor Hartwell model. "We built it," Marcus corrected, "all of us together. That's what Eleanor understood. Healing isn't a solo mission." The afternoon brought a special ceremony that would have made Eleanor beam with pride. Zeus, now fully recovered except for his partial vision loss, was being officially certified as a therapy dog by the American Kennel Club. Representatives from the Department of Defense, the American Legion, and multiple veteran organizations had gathered to witness the milestone. But the most significant moment came when Zeus was reunited with 3 members of his original unit, soldiers whose lives he had saved during the 2019 IED explosion in Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, Corporal John Thompson, and Specialist David Kim had flown in from across the country to see their 4-legged hero one final time. "Zeus," Rodriguez whispered, kneeling beside the German shepherd who had thrown himself between her and certain death. "You beautiful, crazy dog, you did it. You made it home." Zeus's response was immediate and overwhelming. Despite his blindness, he recognized Rodriguez's scent and voice instantly, his tail wagging with such enthusiasm that his entire body wiggled. He pressed against her, whimpering with joy, as if confirming that yes, they had both survived, they had both made it home. The reunion triggered powerful emotions in everyone present. Marcus watched his former K9 partner reconnect with the soldiers Zeus had saved, finally understanding that Zeus's sacrifice had meaning beyond the trauma it had caused. These 3 healthy, living human beings represented the tangible result of Zeus's courage, lives that continued because of his split-second decision to act. "Marcus," Thompson said, approaching Zeus's former handler, "we never got to thank you properly. For training him, for loving him, for making him the dog who saved our lives." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. "I almost destroyed him. After everything he gave us, I nearly let him die." "But you didn't," Kim interjected. "You found a way back to him. You both found a way back to us. That's what matters." As the ceremony concluded, Sarah found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them all together. Zeus's desperate howls that July morning had seemed like the cry of one dying animal. Instead, they had been the call to action that created a movement, transforming individual tragedy into collective healing. The sanctuary now housed 23 K9 veterans in various stages of recovery and rehabilitation. Some, like Zeus, had become therapy animals working with human veterans. Others were learning to adapt to civilian life with adoptive families specially trained to handle their unique needs. A few, too damaged for traditional placement, had found permanent sanctuary homes where they could live out their days with dignity and care. The ripple effects extended far beyond the sanctuary's borders. Marcus had established support groups for canine handlers in 12 states, providing peer counseling for veterans struggling with similar guilt and trauma. Sarah's treatment protocols had been adopted by veterinary schools nationwide, training a new generation of professionals in military animal care. Most importantly, Eleanor's model had proven that caring for canine veterans wasn't charity. It was investment. The therapy dogs trained at the sanctuary had gone on to help hundreds of human veterans, creating a multiplier effect that justified every dollar spent on their care. As evening approached and the ceremony guests departed, Sarah found Zeus in his favorite spot, a shaded area overlooking the sanctuary's main yard where he could monitor the other animals in his care. His service vest identified him as Zeus, Senior Therapy Dog. But to Sarah, he would always be the abandoned hero whose cry for help had changed everything. Marcus joined them, carrying the leather-bound journal he'd started keeping as part of his therapy. "Eleanor was right," he said, settling beside Zeus and scratching behind the dog's ears. "Pain makes people cruel, but love can heal anything." Zeus leaned against Marcus, the trust between them fully restored after months of patient rebuilding. The physical scars would always remain: Zeus's clouded eyes, the surgical scar across his chest, Marcus's own invisible wounds from combat trauma. But the emotional healing had transformed both of them into something stronger than they had been before their separate tragedies. Sarah watched the sunset paint the sanctuary in golden light, illuminating the bronze statue of Eleanor Hartwell, keeping eternal watch over her legacy. Tomorrow would bring new animals in need of healing, new veterans seeking connection with canine partners who understood their struggles without judgment. But tonight, in the peaceful quiet of the sanctuary, Eleanor had envisioned three broken souls. Sarah, Marcus, and Zeus had found what they'd been searching for all along: a purpose worthy of their pain, a family forged through shared commitment to healing, and proof that sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with the simple decision to refuse to walk away when someone needs help. Zeus's gentle snoring filled the evening air as the first stars appeared overhead, his dreams now filled not with explosions and abandonment, but with the faces of those he continued to serve and protect in his new life as a healer. The circle was complete. The hero had come home. Sometimes the most profound healing begins with a single act of compassion. Zeus's story reminds us that it's never too late to choose love over indifference, hope over despair. Eleanor Hartwell, at 72, proved that age isn't a barrier to making an extraordinary impact. Her final gift created a sanctuary that continues saving lives today. Marcus discovered that redemption is possible even after our darkest failures, while Sarah learned that following your heart's calling can transform not just your own life, but an entire community. This story resonates deeply because it reflects the struggles many of us face as we age: feeling forgotten, questioning our purpose, wondering if we still matter. But Zeus, Eleanor, and Marcus show us that our most meaningful chapters can be written in our later years. Every senior has accumulated wisdom, compassion, and life experience that the world desperately needs. Like Eleanor's quiet acts of kindness or Sarah's refusal to walk away from suffering, small acts of love create ripples that change everything. Your story isn't over. It's waiting for you to write the most beautiful chapter yet. What act of unexpected kindness changed your life forever? Have you ever felt called to help someone or something that others had given up on? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.